The cold was everywhere, and it crept into everything like a living thing that wanted to consume all. Warmth in the universe ambassador. Zara pressed her four-fingered hand against the frosted viewport and watched the endless white wasteland of Kethris. Forest stretched toward the horizon where pale blue mountains rose like the teeth of some ancient beast. 3 standard cycles had passed since their transport vessel had suffered the catastrophic drive failure that left them stranded on this frozen moon, and with each passing hour the situation grew more desperate. The Volanti were a proud species with scales that shimmered in shades of silver and blue, and they had traveled the stars for over 10,000 years building diplomatic connections across dozens of systems and hundreds of worlds. But none of that history mattered now as the life support systems continued their slow decline, and the temperature inside their crippled vessel dropped degree by degree. Ambassador, we have sent another distress beacon, said Karath, her senior communications officer, as he entered the command deck with frost forming on his scales. The Galactic Council has confirmed receipt, but the nearest allied fleet remains 12 cycles away. The Sara closed her eyes and felt the weight of 43 lives pressing down upon her shoulders. 12 cycles was far too long, and everyone on this ship knew. And even if no one wanted to say the words out loud, the younglings had been moved to the central compartment where the remaining heat could be concentrated, and the adults took turns standing watch at the outer sections where the cold bit deepest. What about the emergency supplies? The Sara asked, even though she already knew the answer. We have thermal blankets for perhaps 2 more cycles if we ration carefully, Korath replied, and his voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering terrible news. The backup power cells are failing faster than expected, and the chief engineer believes we have maybe 60 hours before complete system failure. 60 hours. The Zara had lived for over 200 years and had negotiated treaties that shaped the fate of entire civilizations, but none of her experience had prepared her for the simple, brutal mathematics of survival. She turned away from the viewport and walked through the corridors of her dying ship past crew members who looked to her for hope that she was not certain she could provide in the central compartment. The younglings were huddled together under layers of blankets, and one of them, a small female with scales that had not yet darkened to adult coloring, looked up at the Zara with wide, trusting eyes. Ambassador the Zara, when will the rescue ships come? The youngling asked. Soon, little one, the Zara replied, and the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. You must rest now and stay warm. She moved on before the youngling could ask more questions that had no good answers. The communication station beeped, and Korath rushed to check the incoming signal with movements made clumsy by the cold that was seeping into all of their limbs. Ambassador, he called out, and there was something strange in his voice. We are receiving a response to our distress. Beacon, the Council fleet? Desara asked as hope flickered in her chest. No, Korath said slowly as he studied the readout. It is a human vessel. Desara felt confusion replace hope, because the humans were not supposed to be anywhere near this sector of space. Humanity was a newcomer species that had only achieved faster than light travel 40 years ago, and they were still considered younglings themselves by the standards of galactic civilization. The Volanti had encountered human diplomats at council gatherings and found them to be friendly, if somewhat naive creatures who asked many questions and seemed eager to learn about the wider galaxy. They possessed a modest fleet of small vessels suitable for exploration and trade, but nothing that could reach Kethris 4 in time to make any difference. What do they say? Desara asked. They claim they are diverting a vessel to assist us, Korath replied, and disbelief colored his words. Estimated arrival time is 6 hours. 6 hours. Desara repeated. That is impossible. The nearest human territory was at least 4 days away at maximum warp speeds, and even the fastest courier ships in the known galaxy could not cover that distance in 6 hours. They must be mistaken about their position, Desara said, Perhaps they are new to navigation in this region and have miscalculated. Perhaps, Korath agreed. But Ambassador, we are in no position to refuse any offer of assistance, regardless of how unlikely it seems. Dasara nodded slowly. Because he was right about that much at least. False hope was still hope. And sometimes, that was enough to keep people alive a little longer. Send a reply, she ordered. Thank them for responding and provide them with our exact coordinates and a full status report on our situation. As Korath worked at the communications console, Dasara allowed herself a moment of quiet contemplation. She had dealt with humans several times during her long career as a diplomat and always found them to be somewhat puzzling creatures. They smiled frequently, even when discussing serious matters, and they had an odd tendency to make light of dangerous situations with something they called humor. At council meetings, they asked questions that seemed almost childishly simple, and they rarely pushed back against the demands of older, more established species. Many of her colleagues dismissed humans as harmless newcomers who would take centuries to become relevant players in galactic politics, but something about them had always made Dasara slightly uneasy, though she could never quite identify what it was. Perhaps it was the way they watched everything with those strange forward-facing eyes that never seemed to miss any detail. Perhaps it was the way they moved through crowded spaces with an awareness that seemed at odds with their friendly demeanor, or perhaps it was simply the fact that a species which had been killing itself in endless wars just a few generations ago had somehow united and reached the stars faster than any other known civilization in recorded history. The humans were strange, and Dasara had learned long ago to pay attention when something felt strange. The message has been sent, Ambassador, Korath reported. They have acknowledged receipt and confirmed they are en route. Then we wait, Dasara said. And we hope that whoever these humans are, they know something about survival that we do not. She returned to the viewport and stared out at the frozen wasteland. As the hours began their slow march forward, somewhere out there in the vast darkness between the stars, a human ship was supposedly racing toward them at speeds that should have been impossible. Thasar did not believe in miracles, but she was willing to accept one if it arrived in time. The cold continued to creep deeper into the ship and into her bones, and she wrapped her thermal cloak tighter around her shoulders as she waited for whatever was coming. 6 hours had never seemed so long. 5 hours and 47 minutes after the humans had promised to arrive, the Thalanthi sensors began detecting something approaching from the outer edge of the system. Dasara had not slept during the long wait, and her scales had taken on a grayish tinge that spoke of exhaustion and cold, but she refused to leave the command deck. Ambassador, I am getting readings, but they do not make sense, said Veth, the young sensor operator, who was shivering despite the 3 thermal blankets wrapped around his shoulders. What do you mean? Dasara asked as she moved to stand behind him. The approaching vessel has a mass signature that our systems cannot properly measure, Veth replied, and his voice trembled with something beyond cold. It is too large. How large? Veth turned to look at her, and his eyes were wide with an emotion that might have been fear or wonder, or perhaps both. Ambassador, the readings suggest a vessel of approximately 12 kilometers in length. Dasara felt the words hit her like a physical blow, because 12 kilometers was not a ship. 12 kilometers was a mobile space station or a generation vessel, or perhaps a small moon that someone had decided to put engines on. The largest warship in the Volanti fleet was 3 kilometers long, and that was considered impressive by galactic standards. That cannot be correct, Dasara said. Run the diagnostic again. I have run it 4 times, Ambassador, Veth replied. The readings are consistent. What about power output? Veth swallowed hard before answering, and the motion made his throat scales click together. The power output exceeds anything in our databases by a factor of approximately 30, he said. Whatever this thing is, it could power a small civilization. Dasara gripped the edge of the console to steady herself, because the universe had just become a very different place than she had believed it. The other crew members had gathered on the command deck drawn by the commotion, and they stared at the sensor displays with expressions of disbelief. "Contact incoming," Korath announced from the communication station. "It is the human vessel hailing us." On screen, the Zara ordered. The view screen flickered and then displayed the face of a human female, with iron gray hair pulled back from a face that carried the marks of age and experience. Her eyes were a pale blue color that reminded the Zara of the frozen wastes outside, and they held a steadiness that spoke of someone who had seen much and survived it all. "This is Captain Helena Vance of the United Earthship Prometheus," the human said, and her voice was calm and controlled. "We received your distress signal and are approaching your position now." "Captain Vance," the Zara replied, and she was proud that her own voice remained steady. "We are grateful for your response, but I must confess some confusion about our arrival time or our ship, Captain," Vance asked, and something that might have been amusement flickered across her features. "Both," the Zara admitted. "All will be explained, Ambassador, but first we need to get your people to safety." Captain Vance said, "Stand by for emergency extraction procedures." The communication ended, and the Zara turned back to the viewport just as the human vessel dropped out of hyperspace. The word that came to her mind was impossible, because what she was seeing should not exist. Prometheus emerged from the swirling vortex of compressed space-time, like some ancient god rising from the depths of legend. It was vast beyond her ability to comprehend, with a hull of dark gray metal that seemed to absorb the light of distant stars. Rather than reflect it, weapon arrays bristled along its length in configurations she did not recognize, and the scars of battle marked its surface in patterns that told stories of conflicts she had never heard of. The ship moved with a grace that should have been impossible for something of its size, as if the laws of physics had simply decided to make an exception. "By the ancestors," Korath whispered, and his voice cracked with awe. "Captain," Veth said, and he sounded like he might be sick, "I am detecting enough firepower on that vessel to destroy every fleet in the known galaxy." "That cannot be accurate," the Zara said, even though she knew in her hearts that it was. "I wish it were not," Veth replied. The humans had told the Galactic Council that they possessed a modest defensive fleet consisting of a few cruisers and some patrol vessels suitable for protecting their trade routes and exploring new systems. They had smiled politely at diplomatic functions and asked naive questions about the military capabilities of other species, as if they were students trying to learn from their elders. They had let everyone believe they were harmless newcomers who posed no threat to the established order of galactic civilization. They had lied about everything. The Prometheus took up position above the frozen moon, like a predator that had no natural enemies, and shuttle craft began launching from its massive hangar bays. Ambassador Korath said, "The humans are requesting permission to board and begin emergency assistance." The Zara nodded slowly, because there was nothing else she could do. Whatever the humans truly were, they had come when her people needed help, and she was not in a position to refuse. "Grant them permission," she said, "and prepare to receive our guests." The first human shuttle touched down beside their crippled vessel within minutes, and figures in advanced environmental suits emerged carrying equipment that the Zara did not recognize. They moved with efficiency and purpose, and within an hour they had done more to stabilize the Valanthi ship than her own engineers had managed in 3 days. They set up portable heating units that filled the corridors with blessed warmth and distributed thermal blankets that seemed to generate their own heat through some technology. The Zara had never encountered. One of the humans approached the younglings in the central compartment and produced containers of a dark liquid that he called hot chocolate. Younglings were hesitant at first, but after the first taste, they were eager for more, and their laughter filled the ship for the first time since the drive failure. Thera watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and growing unease, because she understood. Now that everything she thought she knew about humanity was wrong, the galaxy was full of ancient empires and powerful species who had been traveling the stars for millennia, and all of them had dismissed the humans as irrelevant newcomers. But the newcomers had built a warship that dwarfed anything in existence, and they had hidden it from everyone while smiling and asking their naive questions. What else had they hidden? What else were they capable of? And, perhaps most importantly, why had they chosen this moment to reveal themselves to save 43 stranded diplomats who had no strategic value whatsoever? Captain Alana Vance came aboard the Volanthi vessel an hour after the rescue operations began, and the Sara went to meet her in person. The human was taller than the Sara had expected, and she moved through the corridors with an awareness that reminded the ambassador of a predator walking through unfamiliar territory. Ambassador, the Sara, Captain Vance said, and she extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. I am pleased we arrived in time. The Sara took the offered hand and felt the strength in the human grip. Captain Vance, she replied, my people owe you our lives, but I find myself with many questions. I imagine you do, Captain Vance said, and her pale eyes held no deception. Walk with me, Ambassador, and I will answer what I can. They walked together through the warming corridors of the Volanthi ship, and the Sara felt the weight of history shifting around her. Galaxy would never be the same after this day, and she was not sure if that was a good thing or a terrible one. They walked side by side through the corridors that were now warm with life, and the Sara studied the human beside her with new eyes. Captain Helena Vance moved with the easy confidence of someone who had faced death many times and had learned not to fear it, and her pale blue eyes missed nothing as they passed crew members and rescue workers. You are wondering how we kept this secret, Captain Vance said, and it was not a question. I am wondering many things, the Sara admitted. But yes, that is near the top of my list. The simple answer is that we learn very quickly what happens to newcomers in this galaxy, Captain Vance replied, and her voice carried the weight of bitter experience. When humanity first reached the stars 40 years ago, we thought we would find friends and allies waiting for us. And instead, the Sara prompted. Instead, we found a universe where the strong take what they want and the weak exist only at their pleasure, Captain Vance said. Within our first decade of interstellar travel, we lost 3 colony ships to pirates and 2 research stations to species who decided our territory would make a nice addition to their empires. The Sara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the fading cold of the ship, because she knew the history the human was describing. The Volanthi had watched from a distance as the young human colonies struggled, and they had done nothing because it was not their concern, and because helping might draw unwanted attention. We complained to the Galactic Council, of course, Captain Vance continued, and a grim smile crossed her features. They expressed sympathy and promised to investigate, and then they did absolutely nothing. The Council moved slowly on such matters, the Sara said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. The Council ignores such matters when the victims are weak and the aggressors are strong, Captain Vance corrected, and there was no anger in her voice, only a cold statement of fact. That was when we understood the truth of our situation. They reached an observation window, and Captain Vance stopped to gaze out at the Prometheus hanging in the darkness above them like a mountain of steel and hidden power. We had 2 choices, she said. We could remain weak and hope the galaxy would eventually accept us, or we could make ourselves strong enough that no one would ever prey on us again. You chose strength, the Sara said. We chose survival, Captain Vance replied, but we also chose patience, because we understood that revealing our true capabilities would paint a target on our backs. So you hid. We played the role that everyone expected of us, Captain Vance said, and she turned to face the Sara directly. We smiled. diplomatic functions and asked naive questions, and let everyone believe we were harmless children stumbling through a galaxy of adults. And all the while you were building, the Tsar said as understanding dawned. For 30 years we have been constructing. In the dark spaces between stars, where no one thinks to look, Captain Vance confirmed. The Prometheus is one of 37 vessels in her class, and she is not even our largest. 37 vessels, like the Prometheus there felt her legs weaken. And she leaned against the wall for support because the implications were staggering. A single Prometheus-class vessel could destroy the combined fleets of the Galactic Council, and the humans had 37 of them. Plus, something even larger. Why? Reveal yourselves now, Dasara asked. Why expose your greatest secret to save a few dozen stranded diplomats? Captain. Vance was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice had softened, because secrets are only valuable when the alternative is worse, she said, and letting innocent people freeze to death, while we had the power to save them, would make us no better than the species who preyed on us when we were weak. She gestured toward the central compartment where the sounds of Volanti, younglings laughing over their hot chocolate, could be heard. We did not build these ships because we wanted to conquer, Captain Vance said. We built them so that we would have something to offer when the innocent needed protection. You could have let us die and kept your secret, the Tsar said. No one would have known. We would have known, Captain Vance replied simply. And that is not who we want to be. The Zara studied the human woman and tried to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she had believed about humanity. The smiling newcomers who asked too many questions and seemed so eager to please were the same species that had built the most terrifying war machine the galaxy had ever seen, and they had revealed that machine not for conquest or glory, but to rescue strangers who had never done anything for them. What are you? The Zara asked, and she meant it as a genuine question, not an accusation. We are human, Captain Vance said, and there was something ancient in her eyes. Despite the relative youth of her species, we are what happens when a species spends its entire existence fighting itself. I do not understand. For most of our history, we were our own worst enemy, Captain Vance explained. We fought wars over territory and resources and beliefs and things that seem utterly meaningless in hindsight, and we became very good at killing each other. Many species have warlike histories, the Tsara said. Not like ours, Captain Vance replied, and there was no pride in her voice, only a weary acceptance. We developed weapons that could destroy our entire civilization, and we came within minutes of using them on multiple occasions, and only luck and last-minute wisdom prevented our extinction. And yet, you survived. We survived, and we learned, Captain Vance said. We learned every lesson about war that could possibly be learned, and we paid for those lessons in blood and tears and the ashes of cities that no longer exist. She paused and looked out at the Prometheus again. But we also learned something else, she continued. We learned that the strong have a responsibility to protect the weak, and that true power lies not in what you can destroy, but in what you choose to preserve. A noble sentiment, the Tsara said, but difficult to believe from a species that built such weapons. We built the weapons because we know what happens when good people lack the power to resist evil, Captain Vance said. We built them so that when the next threat comes, and it will come, we will be ready. And in the meantime, we watch and we wait and we help where we can without revealing ourselves, Captain Vance said. Or at least that was the plan until 43 Volanti diplomats needed rescue, and our conscience made the choice for us. The Zara thought about everything she had heard and everything she had seen, and she felt the shape of the galaxy shifting around her. The humans were not the naive newcomers everyone believed them to be. They were wolves who had learned to wear the skins of sheep, and they had been walking among the other species for 4 decades without anyone suspecting the truth. What happens now? The Tsara asked. Your secret is exposed, and the galaxy will react. The galaxy will do what it always does, Captain Vance said. The powerful will feel threatened and the weak will feel hope, and everyone will try to figure out what this means for their own interests. And humanity. Humanity will continue doing what we have always done, Captain Vance said, and her smile held genuine warmth for the first time. We will protect those who need protecting, and we will stand against those who prey on the innocent. She extended her hand again, and this time, the gesture felt like something more than a simple greeting. The question is, Ambassador, what will the Valanti do? The Zara looked at the human hand and understood that she was being offered more than friendship. She was being offered a choice about what kind of galaxy she wanted to live in. After a long moment, she took the hand and felt the strength and warmth of human skin against her scales. I think, she said slowly, that the Valanti have been watching from the sidelines for far too long. Captain. Vance smiled, and for the first time, the Zara saw not a predator, but a protector. Then welcome to the pack, Ambassador. The peace lasted for exactly 4 hours and 12 minutes before the universe decided to provide a demonstration of exactly why the humans had built their terrible ships. The Zara was in the medical bay watching a human doctor tend to one of her crew members who had developed frostbite when the alert klaxons began their screaming wail. All personnel to stations. Captain Vance's voice came over the intercom, calm and controlled, despite the obvious urgency. We have incoming hostile contacts. The Zara rushed to the command deck of her vessel, where the view screens had been connected to the Prometheus sensor array, and what she saw made her blood run cold. 12 ships had dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the system, and they were arranged in a classic attack formation that she recognized immediately. HFY Raiders, Korath said, and his voice was tight with fear. They must have detected our distress beacon. The HFY were notorious throughout the galaxy as the most vicious and successful pirates in known space, with a fleet of stolen and modified warships that had terrorized shipping lanes for generations. They preyed on damaged vessels and isolated outposts, and they took prisoners only when those prisoners had value. As slaves or hostages, a stranded diplomatic transport would be like a feast laid out before hungry predators. They are hailing us, Korath reported. Put it through. The Zara said. The view screen flickered and displayed the face of a HFY commander, with mottled green skin and a mouth full of sharpened teeth that gleamed in the low light of his bridge. Attention, crippled vessel, the commander said, and his voice was a low growl of anticipation. I am Warlord Kreth of the ship Fang of Hunger, and you are now my property, Warlord Kreth. The Zara began, but the pirate cut her off with a sharp gesture. You will surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Kreth continued. Any resistance will result in the immediate execution of half. Your crew and the remaining half will wish they had died as well. I would advise you to reconsider your position, the Zara said, and she was surprised by how steady her voice remained. The situation is not what it appears to be. The situation is exactly what it appears to be, Kreth replied, and his teeth gleamed in what might have been a smile. A helpless diplomatic vessel full of valuable hostages, and no one to save them. Look at your sensors, the Zara said. Look carefully at what else is in this system. Kreth's eyes flicked to something off-screen, and the Zara watched the arrogance drain from his face like water from a broken vessel. The silence stretched for several seconds before the warlord spoke again. What is that? He asked, and for the first time, his voice carried something other than confidence. That is the United Earth ship Prometheus, the Zara replied, and I believe her captain would like to speak with you. The screen split to show Captain Vance standing on the bridge of the Prometheus, and her pale eyes were colder than the frozen moon below. Warlord Kreth, Captain Vance said, and her voice was calm in a way that was far more terrifying than any threat. You have 10 seconds to power down your weapons and withdraw from this system. You think one ship can intimidate the HFY fleet? Kreth replied, and he was trying to sound defiant, but his voice wavered. We have 12 warships, and you are alone." 9 seconds, Captain Vance said. "This is outrageous," Kreth snarled. "The humans are a minor power with a handful of patrol boats, and I will not be threatened by 7 seconds. Kreth opened his mouth to continue his protest, but one of his officers shouted something that made him turn. "Pale, Warlord, our targeting systems have been locked," the officer reported. "Their ship has us marked, and our countermeasures are not responding." 5 seconds, Captain Vance said, and she had not moved or changed her expression. "You would not dare," Kreth said, but his voice had lost all of its earlier bravado. "The Galactic Council would." 3 seconds, retreat, Kreth screamed at his crew. "All ships retreat now." But it was already too late for one of them. The Fang of Hunger had been slowly advancing during the exchange, positioning itself for an attack run that its commander had clearly been planning despite his negotiations captain. Vance had noticed the Prometheus fired a single beam of concentrated stellar energy that existed for less than half a second, and the Fang of Hunger simply ceased to exist there. Was no explosion and no debris field, and no slowly expanding cloud of gas and wreckage. The ship was there, and then it was not as if the universe had simply decided to erase it from existence. The remaining 11 pirate vessels fled into hyperspace so quickly that their drives left visible distortion trails across the fabric of Spacetum, stared at the empty space where the Fang of Hunger had been and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the universe. She had witnessed the destruction of warships before in her long life, but she had never seen anything like this. The Prometheus had not destroyed the pirate vessel it had unmated ambassador. Captain Vance's voice came through the communication channel. "I apologize for the disturbance, but I believe the threat has been neutralized." Neutralized, the Zara repeated, and the word felt inadequate to describe what she had just witnessed. "The remaining vessels are fleeing at maximum speed, and I do not believe they will return," Captain Vance said. "We will continue with the evacuation procedures." The screen returned to its normal display, and the Zara found herself surrounded by her crew, who was staring at her with expressions of shock and wonder. "Ambassador," Korath said slowly, "what just happened?" "The humans happened," the Zara replied, "and I do not think the galaxy will ever be the same." She made her way to the observation deck, where she could see the Prometheus hanging in the darkness like a guardian angel made of steel and terrible purpose. The younglings had gathered at the windows, and they were pointing at the massive ship with excited gestures and chattering voices. They did not understand what they had just witnessed. They did not know that the weapon which had erased the Fang of Hunger from existence could just as easily have destroyed worlds. They only knew that the nice humans who had given them hot chocolate had also scared away the bad people, and that was enough for Thenthasara watched the children and wondered what kind of galaxy they would grow up in now that the humans had revealed themselves. The balance of power that had existed for thousands of years had just been shattered, and no one knew what would rise from the wreckage. Would the humans use their terrible power to dominate and control, as so many species had done before them, or would they do something that the galaxy had never seen? Before they could conquer everything, Korath said softly as he came to stand beside her. No one could stop them. Yes, the Zara agreed. They could, but they are not going to, Korath said, and it was not quite a question. No, the Zara said, and she felt a strange certainty growing in her hearts. I do not think they are. How can you be sure? The Zara watched as another shuttle launched from the Prometheus, carrying more supplies and more rescue workers to help her. Stranded people, because they could have ignored our distress beacon, she said. They could have kept their secret and let us freeze, and no one would have ever known what they truly were. But they came anyway, Korath said. They came anyway, the Zara confirmed. And I think that tells us everything we need to know about who the humans really are. The Prometheus hung silent and watchful above them, and somewhere in the galaxy, 11 pirate ships were spreading the word about what they had encountered. The wolves had finally revealed themselves, and the sheep of the galaxy would soon learn that not all predators hunt for their own benefit. 3 months had passed since the incident at Kethris 4, and Ambassador Thesara stood at the podium of the Galactic Council chamber preparing to deliver the most important speech of her career. The vast amphitheater was filled with representatives of over 100 species, and they had come from every corner of known space to hear her report. Rumors had spread faster than any ship could travel, and every being in the galaxy wanted to know the truth about what had happened on that frozen moon. Thesara looked out at the sea of alien faces and saw fear and wonder and calculation in equal measure. The Drathkai delegation sat in rigid silence, and their 4 eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that spoke of deep concern. The Drathkai had spent centuries building the largest military force in the galaxy, and they had used that force to expand their empire across hundreds of systems. Now they were wondering if their mighty fleet was worth anything at all. The Syndicate of Krell had sent their senior representative for the first time in decades, and the ancient creature sat wrapped in shadows at the back of the chamber. The Krell had grown wealthy beyond measure through piracy and extortion, and they were suddenly very interested in the changing balance of power. Dozens of smaller species filled the middle tiers of the chamber, and the Thesara could see hope in their eyes. These were the species who had been preyed upon and exploited and ignored for generations, and they were waiting to learn if their fortunes were about to change. Distinguished representatives, Thesara began, and her voice carried across the vast space with perfect clarity. I stand before you today to give my official report on the events of Kethris 4. She activated the holographic display, and an image of the Prometheus appeared above the chamber, rotating slowly so that everyone could see its terrible majesty. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, because rumors were one thing, but seeing the actual vessel was something else entirely. 3 months ago, my diplomatic delegation was stranded on the frozen moon of Kethris 4, following a catastrophic drive failure. Thesara continued, we sent distress beacons to the Galactic Council and were informed that rescue was 12 cycles away. She paused to let the implications sink in. 12 cycles would have been too long, she said. We would have frozen to death long before help arrived, and the Council knew this when they gave us that estimate. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats because they understood what she was really saying. The Council had written off her delegation as acceptable losses and had not even attempted to expedite rescue efforts. The humans responded to our beacon within hours, Thesara said. They diverted this vessel to UES Prometheus, and they saved 43 lives that the rest of the galaxy had abandoned. At what cost? Called out the Drathkai ambassador, and his voice was sharp with suspicion. The humans do nothing without motive. The cost was their greatest secret, Thesara replied. Secret they had kept for 30 years, while they built a fleet that surpasses anything in known space. She enlarged the holographic image and highlighted the weapon arrays that covered the Prometheus hull. This single vessel destroyed a Kethvori battlecruiser with one shot, she said. The ship was not damaged or disabled, but completely erased from existence in less than half a second. Impossible, someone shouted from the upper tiers. I witnessed it myself, Thesara replied calmly, as did my entire crew and the 11 remaining Kethvori vessels that fled in terror. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates shouted questions and accusations and demands for explanation. Thesara waited patiently for the noise to subside before continuing. I know what many of you are thinking, she said. You are wondering when the humans will turn their weapons against the rest of us. Silence fell across the chamber as every representative leaned forward to hear her answer. I asked Captain Helena Vance of the Prometheus that same question, Thesara said. And she gave me an answer that I believe every being in this chamber needs to hear. She took a deep breath and recalled the words that had changed her understanding of humanity. She said that the humans did not hide their strength so they could use it for conquest. The Zara continued. They hid it so that when the innocent needed protection, they would have something worth offering. Pretty words, the Drathkai ambassador sneered. But words are easy, and actions tell the truth. Then let me tell you about their actions. The Zara replied, and her voice grew stronger. The humans came to save strangers who had never done anything for them, and they exposed their greatest military advantage in the process. She turned to address the entire chamber directly. They could have ignored our beacon and kept their secret, she said. They could have let us freeze to death, and no one would ever have known what they were truly capable of. But they chose to save lives instead of protecting their strategic position, she continued. They chose compassion over calculation, and that choice cost them the element of surprise that they had spent 30 years building. Why? The Krell representative asked, and his ancient voice echoed through the chamber. Why would any species sacrifice such an advantage for strangers? Because they believe that the strong have a responsibility to protect the weak. The Zara said, because they have learned through their own painful history that true power is not measured by what you can destroy, but by what you choose to preserve. She deactivated the holographic display and stood alone at the podium facing the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. I have lived for over 200 years, she said. I have negotiated treaties and witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and I thought I understood how the galaxy works. The strong prey on the weak, she continued. The powerful take what they want, and the rest of us survive by staying out of their way. But the humans have shown me a different way, she said. They built the most powerful warship in existence, and they used it to rescue 43 strangers and serve hot chocolate to frightened children. A ripple of confused murmurs spread through the chamber at the mention of hot chocolate. But the Zara pressed on. The humans call themselves wolves, she said. But they are not the kind of wolves we have learned to fear. They are the wolves who have chosen to guard the flock instead of hunting it. She let the words hang in the air for a long moment before speaking her final thoughts. The galaxy is changing, she said. The old order of predators and prey is giving way to something new, and we each have a choice to make about what kind of future we want to live in. We can fear the humans and their terrible power, she said. We can scheme and plot and try to find ways to bring them down before they turn against us. Or we can recognize that for the first time in galactic history, there is a power that wants to protect rather than dominate. She looked directly at the Drathkai ambassador, who had been so quick to assume the worst. The humans did not ask for payment or alliance or political concessions, she said. They asked for nothing at all except a chance to help. Perhaps, she concluded, it is time for the rest of us to learn from their example. The Zara stepped back from the podium, and the chamber erupted once again in voices, speaking dozens of languages and expressing dozens of different reactions. Some delegates were already leaving to send urgent messages to their governments, while others clustered in groups to discuss what they had heard. Galaxy would spend months and years debating the implications of humanity's revelation, and many would never trust the newcomers regardless of their actions. But the Zara had seen the truth in Captain Vance's eyes, and she knew in her hearts that the humans meant what they said. They were wolves who had chosen to protect rather than hunt, and that simple choice had changed everything. As she left the chamber, the Zara thought of the youngling who had asked her when the rescue ships would come, and she smiled for the first time in months. The rescue had come, and it had brought hope for a galaxy that had forgotten what hope looked like. The humans were watching now with their terrible ships and their strange compassion, and the predators of the galaxy would have to find new prey, or perhaps they would have to become something better than predators. Perhaps they would have to learn what the humans had learned through blood and fire and centuries of war, that the true measure of strength is not what you can destroy, but what you choose to protect. The new galaxy had begun an ambassador. The Zara was proud to be part of building it.